All right, Nathan, thanks for joining me today.
Yeah, thanks for having me on.
So, as most people probably know, you're the founder of ConvertKit. Probably the primary reason I've got you on the show here. Obviously, a huge success. As we record this, you're throwing out a number about $28 million in ARR, which is huge. Congratulations. That's such an achievement. I actually am really curious about hearing more about ConvertKit's origin story because having been in the world of information marketing since for me, like I got started with an email list probably around 2004, I think was my first list.
Yeah,
And I remember, I think, you guys showed up into what was already a crowded space at the time.
yeah,
So I can't wait to hear about, why you even decided to enter such a crowded space at the time. But before we do any of that, you want to just give us I was asking you before the show for a highlight reel of what, how big has ConvertKit become and what does it do for any of those who might not know what it is?
yeah. So ConvertKit is online marketing, marketing platform for creators. So think of creators as anyone from like bloggers, podcasters, musicians, artists, filmmakers, all of that. So we have like a whole range of people. Like Amy Vitale is this incredible National Geographic photographer who uses us to stay in touch with her list. Tim Ferriss, Arnold Schwarzenegger runs his newsletter on ConvertKit.
Cool.
Tim McGraw, Leon Bridges. We just acquired a company called FanBridge, which is email marketing for musicians, and so that like brought over a few thousand musicians to the platform.
I was actually really curious. I'll ask you it now. With FanBridge, I was reading about your acquisition there, and there was a
Yeah,
part of me going, I wonder if Nathan made this acquisition because he wants to hang out with more cool musicians. Was there a little bit of that in there?
there's a little bit of that for
Okay.
sure. Um, it's one of those things. So maybe 2 years ago, we noticed that we were getting traction in the music space, kind of by accident. We actually got Tim McGraw as a customer, and that was one where it's like, oh, like there's a big name. How'd that, it came about through connections and they were on MailChimp and, it was a natural fit to move over. Um, but then we started putting in some more deliberate effort and just realized we could build this company for any type of audience, right? And I think so many people who get into SaaS, um, they kind of somewhere between luck into their customer base and default into it, where like you saw an opportunity and so then you started serving those customers, and before you know it, you're like the biggest real estate SaaS company ever, and you're like, but I don't actually like realtors, or something like that, right? Um, and we realized that we didn't just want to go wherever we were naturally pulled. Like for example, because I think a lot of your audience has been around information marketing for a long time. Um, I think Infusionsoft as a company, now Keep, they got pulled very much just like whichever direction things went. And so they ended up with a lot of like, um, there's like online marketing and then there's the sleazy version of online marketing. And there was good money for them in it. And so they were totally okay with those people using it. And then they became very much known for that type of customer base, which hurts deliverability and it hurts like all of these other things, right? And we just realized that we didn't want to go wherever we were naturally pulled. We wanted to be very deliberate about the types of customers we served. And it was going to be the creators that inspire us. We weren't going to be the company that like years later we're like, it's a great business, but like we don't like the work, or we don't like the industry. And so about 2 years ago, we had this conversation of like, well, who would we be most excited about to have as customers? And we had the like authors and bloggers and all kinds of people we were super excited about. But then like musicians stood out as like, oh, these are creators that really inspire us. So we realized, oh, well, that's a good business too. Like, why don't we bring them into the fold as well? And so kind of the last, I'd say 18 months in particular has been expanding in music. And so you get all kinds of people like, Leon Bridges, Mandy Moore, a whole bunch of other Def Leppard now uses to convert. It's like, it's funny, just all like the list just goes on and on. And it just came from a deliberate focus in that area. So that's a bit of a tangent, but it's just, I think as people build their businesses, too much of it happens on autopilot, or where there's momentum and rather than deliberate effort. And so just think about, years from now, who do you want your customers to be and what steps do you put in place now to make that happen?
Yeah, such a good point. not just from the side of I want a certain type of client, but also where is the market going? I know, for example, with my own company at the moment, Inbox Done, we're getting some traction with accountants, which makes me go, okay, let's become the email management service for accountant firms. But then I'm like, do I want to spend all day, basically pitching this service to this world? It's like there's a personal decision as well as a business decision in there. Obviously, I don't have to be the one who's doing the marketing forever as well. So there's that to think about. But, Mandy Moore, it's just kind of cool, Def Leppard, to go out there and say, well, these are our clients. I'm sure that helps to bring in more clients as well. Just to close the loop, I know I asked you how big ConvertKit actually is. So 28 million run rate. There's some other big numbers you can report back.
Yeah, so we're 65 people on the team. We've always been a paid product up until about a year and a half ago. We launched a free version. So we now have 36,000 paying customers and about 400,000 free users. And so that's been growing really quickly. Those are the main stats. Like we're public with all of our metrics. So if you go to convertkit.bearmetrics.com, you can see like MRR and churn and everything else in real time. Just because I wanted to leave those breadcrumbs for anyone else building a company, like following along. So if they're curious, like, hey, I'm at 20,000 a month in revenue and we're really struggling with churn, like, I wonder what ConvertKit's churn was at 20,000 a month, right? And so you can actually go back and filter back to like 2015 when that was true and see what all our numbers were then. We're an open book about everything.
I think that's great. I think it possibly helped you early on too, with perhaps spreading the word, getting more coverage. Coming from myself, the world of blogging, you go back 15 years, it was all the rage for every blogger to kind of do their income report. Obviously, Pat Flynn and John Lee Dumas kind of really made it a thing, but everyone was doing it no matter how much money you made. It almost became, boring, I hate to say it, but blasé for a blogger to do it. But you started doing it with a SaaS startup, which I think was also, really, it's just great. I think the transparency is fantastic. There's some risk with it too, but listen, I want to go back in time and talk a little bit about your early years and then also the start of ConvertKit. So are you a Boise boy, I can say this as a tongue twister, Boise boy, born and raised in Idaho?
Yes. So I grew up about 45 minutes to an hour outside of Boise, up in the mountains. And so I grew up roaming the hills. I was homeschooled, have a bunch of siblings. So like common activities for us were like making swords in my dad's shop and like, playing knights as we roamed the hills and all that. And then I've moved around the Boise area, traveled a whole bunch, but always lived or had a home base here.
Does that mean there wasn't much internet up in the hills, or was that available?
We had dial-up internet, for too long. I remember the 28K modem. I got into, I'm trying to think when it was. I got into web design in high school, actually, because a girl that I dated was like making websites on GeoCities, and like little animated GIFs and I remember like watching that and going, wait, so hold on, you type what into Notepad and then refresh, and then how does that work? And then like getting books from the library and I loved the immediate feedback loop of you can make this change in code and then it would immediately show up over here, and like you'd make this change and then show up and it wouldn't do anything over here, and you'd have to like dig in and find out why it didn't work.
Okay, well,
so like as a 15-year-old, that was tons of fun. And then I got Photoshop and started playing from there. Actually, that was pirating Photoshop on dial-up internet is remarkably difficult.
Yeah, big download.
So.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I remember looking for keys. I always find the key to open up the software. We shouldn't be saying this on a public recording, though. Anyway.
That's your limitations.
Who would have thought? And Photoshop's a SaaS now, so there you go.
Yeah.
So if you're dating yourself by saying GeoCities too, which makes you kind of like a late mid-90s sort of web design, getting interested in that. Did you at 15, was there like plans in your mind to go to university? Like, did you have a career in mind or anything like that back then?
Yeah, the first career that I wanted to have was as a landscaper. So that didn't end up happening. I even like early in high school, one of my dad's friends had a landscaping business, so I like to work for him, and I was like, oh, this is what I'm gonna do. That's not all what I'm what I ended up doing, though. I own a farm now, so maybe there's some like tie in that like arc. Let's see, probably about that high school time, I started getting projects to design like a simple logo or a really simple website. Freelance gigs for like $100, $300, $500, and so that was what I was doing then. As a kid, all of my friends were older than me, and so I kept trying to like keep up with them, and so I actually like the combination of that and being homeschooled. I realized that basically I was still going to be in high school, and all my friends were going to graduate and go to college, and I still have like a couple years of high school left. And so I went to my parents and said, like, hey, is a high school 4 years or is it a fixed amount of work? And I had older siblings, and so my parents had already defined like what high school meant, like the curriculum and all of that, even being homeschooled. And so they like said, no, it's a fixed amount of work. Like, go ahead and like, here's the list if you want it. And so I spent, I guess it was from when I was 14 to like 15 and a half, or 13 to 15, somewhere in there, doing all of high school. So I remember thinking, like, as we drove from Boise to Seattle for like family road trip, thinking like, well, I'm bored for this 8 hours in the car. I'm also bored while I'm doing algebra. So why don't I combine those two? And I'd do like a month's worth of algebra on a 8-hour drive. And I'd have like my older brother would be there. So I'd be like, David, how do you, like I'm stuck. How do you do this? And he, is pre-iPad. So he had nothing better to do than help me with algebra.
Wow.
So I ended up graduating when I was 15 and started going to college then. First for graphic design and then marketing, and then dropped out when I was 17 when I started getting like, basically I got my first $10,000 web design gig and was like, I'm here going to college to learn how to make money. I think I've learned how to make money. Like, I'm on to doing the next thing.
Okay. So you must have been like, what, 18, 19 when you're landing these $10,000 clients? Is that?
I was 17.
Wow.
Yeah. So
how do you,
I dropped out of college before most people drop out of high school.
Crazy.
So,
okay. A few questions surface there. How do you convince someone at 17 to pay you $10,000 to do something?
What's the phrase on the internet? No one knows that you're a dog.
Right. So you had this picture of a guy with a beard and a mustache on your profile, right? And
yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Well, it was also before video calls, and so we would get on calls, and I probably sounded really young, but yeah, it was one of those things. I'm realizing that contract was referred by someone else who worked with one of their competitors. So basically, it was software for a sign language interpreting agency out of, let me think, Sacramento. And so they basically needed software to manage their freelance interpreters going to like doctor appointments and, all the things that they would do. And so they went to one of their competitors who they were friendly with, in a different market. And basically said, hey, you have software for this. How did you do it? And they're like, oh, well, we hired this guy, David, in Idaho to do it. And David was my friend. And so they went to David and he was like, oh, well, actually I have a non-compete. Like I can't help you because you're competitors and all of that. And so he referred them to me. And we'd done, like with some contract web developers, I'd done, I did websites and like small web applications. And this is the first like real web application. And I did all of the design and HTML and CSS and like the business side of it. And then a contract developer like wrote the back end of it. So it was still good profit.
Nice.
Like I cleared like $5,000 on that.
Nice. Okay. At 17, that's like huge money. Oh.
Yeah, it was pretty great.
So take us forward then. How does that grow into a full-blown agency that you ran for a number of years?
It was basically freelance.
Okay.
For a few years, basically staying at that level, like enough money to earn a living, but then not, I mean, it was incredible for me. Looking back, I'm like, okay, I think I was making like $50,000 a year or something, Yeah. Now, what happened was it would be 2008. I had just had like my best month of freelancing. I think I've been freelancing for 3 years then.
So you're 20 years
And
old at
just
that
had,
point.
yeah, yeah, 19, somewhere in there.
You're really
And
only 22 right now, aren't you, Nathan? That's the truth.
yeah, exactly. For anyone curious, I'm all of 31
Okay.
as of a week
Okay.
ago. Um, so let's see. I had lined up a bunch of freelance projects, just had like my best month ever of like $12,000 of work in a single month. The thing that I learned about freelancing though is that you're like, oh, here's the contracts I have signed, and here's the money I have coming, but it always gets delayed. And so you like keep counting it in the same month, but you're realizing you're counting the same. You're like, oh, this is great. I've got like $10,000 coming in, and like a month later, you're like, hey, I've got $10,000 coming in, but like 8,000 of it is what you expect the previous month from finishing the contract or whatever, And so it's like not as good as you hoped it would be, But
Still,
anyway,
at 20
so
years old, you know, 8,000 a month is awesome.
it is. It is. I went to on a trip with my girlfriend at the time. I guess we were engaged then. We went on a trip to South Africa with some other friends and spent 5 weeks traveling all around. Had a great time, and then came back. And I went to pick up all the conversations with clients, and they were all like, hey, I don't know if you know, but it's 2009 and we're in the middle of a recession, and like we're not spending money until our clients spend money. So I went from like top of the world with my freelancing to I've earned a month and a half off, and then coming back and like there's no work to be had.
Did you not see the GFC happening while you were traveling in Africa, or?
I don't think I knew enough to pay attention to
Fair
it.
enough.
You don't have at that point you don't have the trend or data points. It's just like your own localized thing, and so or it's like that's the thing that affects like normal businesses. But I'm on the internet. What I didn't realize is like I was building websites for like construction companies and remodelers and all of those, and they were basically like, oh, everything is dried up, and so I actually ended up taking a job with the one client that still had work, and I took a full-time role with them. And they were a software company, and I ended up staying in there for 3 years. And during that time, I got into learned how to work on a team, right? Because I thought I knew everything, right? As one does at 18, 19, 20 years old. But I'd never like worked on a team, worked in an office in that environment, had a salary, things like that. So that was a great experience.
Was it a great experience though, or was that a bit of a struggle? Because to go from kind of being your own boss to having a boss and having set hours and set salary, that must have been a bit of a shock, no?
It was both. It was really helpful to have the the set salary, and especially at that time, and to have coworkers and so much of that, especially because like the consistent business side of freelancing was not something that I was really good at. And so having like a set salary was really nice. But I remember times that I really struggled. Like I remember one time in particular of like something had come up and maybe I was still doing a little bit of freelancing, and I'd like just left the office, to go do the other thing. And like my manager, when I got back, I'm like, hey man, you can't do that. And I was like, what do you mean I can't do that? And so, like everything, it was a blessing and a curse. During that time while I was there, the iPad came out in 2010. And so we built an iPad app the day the iPad was released, or had it ready. So that was an incredible experience to learn iOS development and design. And that turned into my next side hustle of like building apps and selling them in the App Store. And that was really fun. I got to the point where I was averaging between $2,000 and $4,000 a month of sales in the App Store for various apps. I had a habit tracking app. I had a flashcards app. I think every beginner developer makes a flashcards app, like just out of obligation or something. I also had an app that was for like kids with autism who didn't speak, or someone who had a stroke and lost the ability to speak. And so it had like these tiles on it, and you would like select the tiles that had an image or a short phrase, and then it had synthesized speech, and so it would like verbalize that phrase. And there was all this like dedicated PCs that were made for that were like $7,000, and so with the iPad, you could like have this great hardware and everything else, and an app that is so much better. So that was probably my best money maker.
This was after you left the job at the software development firm?
This was on the side while I was at the job.
Okay, side hustle.
So basically, there were a few of us there that like work needed us to learn Objective-C and iOS development. And so we'd do it at work, and then we'd all spin up our side projects and keep coding and figuring it out on the weekend, which work was happy about, because then we'd show up on Monday and we're like, hey, we know this much more about iOS development than we did on Friday. And so, they were like, yeah, great, keep, figuring out these projects. And there were 2 developers there who I would help them with the design on their apps, because that was my career, and they would help me with code. And so we weren't partners in any of that way. We were like, I guess, advisors for each other's projects. Like I remember coding my Habits app, and getting stuck in like 5 different directions, where you like code as far on this problem as you can, and you like can't figure it out. So you work on this feature over here, keep doing that. And then like on a Saturday going over to my friend Chris's house, who was, coworker, and be like, okay, here's all the problems that I have. And he would like be like, okay, look into it. And then be like, all right, computer science 101. Let's explain number types, cause I'm like, using a float when I should have been using an integer, or like some of these things, and just not having that like computer science background.
Right. So you're becoming an engineer almost.
Yeah, we're working on it. I never like got so far into it that people should hire me to program. But I was always good at like interface design and then any front end code. That was my world.
So all this is a side project. So you're taking your salary now and you're selling all these apps. So you must be accumulating, a bit more money at that stage. Were you thinking, this is great, I'm going to retire, or, I'm going to put this into my first home purchase? Like, what was your financial mindset around that time?
Yeah. So I was relatively newly married. And my salary was $60,000 a year, which I thought was an amazing salary. And let's see, then I was really saving up money so that I could quit the job. Like all of my money from iPhone apps went straight into the bank. By the time that I did quit, it was a little over $20,000 that I had saved up specifically from iOS apps. And really, I wanted to go back to freelancing and doing apps and making products. And so that was 2011 that I quit.
With the plan just to be a freelancer?
Yeah, a freelancer, and wherever the iPhone apps took me, Okay. And it was basically like the cycle was build my own apps, promote them, talk about design, get more like app design clients, and kind of just play in this ecosystem. Where things really took off for me was the following year in September 2012. I wrote a book called The App Design Handbook, which was about how to design iOS applications. At the time, I think O'Reilly had a book out, but that was it. So they're now like one traditionally published and one ebook on app design, because everyone was talking about code. No one was talking about the design side. And I built up like a tiny little email list of 800 people on MailChimp. And I had 2 goals for the book. One was to get freelance clients, because I figured if I was the guy who wrote the book on app design, like people would hire me to do that. And the second one is that I wanted to make money from products, and I followed people like Chris Gillibo and Tim Ferriss and others, who were either doing digital products themselves or would like profile people who were doing it. And so I was like, oh, I want to be like that. And so I was hoping I could make $10,000 over the life of the book. it ended up making $12,000 on launch day.
Wow.
And then like 19,000 by the end of the week. And I fell in love with the world of self-publishing, selling digital products, like having a blog, having an audience, a newsletter. I remember talking to one friend who lives here in Boise, because Boise has a very deep internet marketing community, which everyone flies under the radar. But like bodybuilding.com, ClickBank, ClickFunnels, they're all founded here in Boise, and there's even
Russell Brunson's the
more
one
from there.
who actually told me or taught me how to pronounce Boise, because I kept hearing him talk so much. So
Yes, exactly. So there's just so much here. And so a friend of mine, I was talking to him and I was like, yeah, email marketing is incredible. Like, I'd far rather have an email subscriber than a Twitter follower or Instagram. And he's just like, yeah, we've all known that since 2002, but like, good job. Like, do you want a gold star? Like, what do you mean? And then, this is 2012 or whatever.
how do you though make 19,000 on your first ever campaign selling a book? Like, what was the breakthrough result?
Yeah, so there were a few things. I built up the audience. And so like 800 email subscribers. Now I'm like, the tendency is to think 800 is so small. But really, like 800 people is a lot. So that was the first thing. The second thing is I did a ton of guest blogging. The day that the book came out, I published posts on like all the top interface design posts or like sites, websites like Smashing Magazine that were big in the web design space, all kinds of stuff like that. I think I had maybe 10 or 12 guest posts go live that same day. I was trying to make as big of a splash as possible.
Yeah, that's great. So you timed them all.
And that was inspired by an article that Tim Ferriss had written about launching the 4-Hour Body when he had done that same thing. And I remember like he was writing about, well, what was fascinating to me is that there's like sort of this narrow view of the 4-Hour Body, right? It's a health and fitness book, so you can publish. Like his partnership with bodybuilding.com made lots of sense. But like, what would he ever write for the Basecamp blog? Well, obviously he would write something about how he used Basecamp to organize all the work for this like crazy complicated research-driven book. And so it's just this example of like, oh, if I want to talk about this thing, I can do it in a different lens for all these different audiences and make something that's relevant to them. So that's what I was trying to do.
Okay, and that was enough to bring in essentially, I mean, you must have sold $19,000 worth of an ebook. You can't be charging more than $20, $30, right, for the book.
Okay, so that's the other thing. Tiered pricing is like the most important thing. And I actually wrote a lot about pricing strategy and that sort of thing in 2013, basically. And so what I did is I charged $29 for the book, and then I had an additional package at $79 that had like some videos and training, some of my like individual templates, Photoshop files, interface builder things. And then for $149 was the price that I went with. I had like a complete package that had the whole toolkit of what I use to design apps. And so I did the math on that later, and it more than doubled the revenue of if I had just had a single $29 ebook. So that was the thing that I became known for, like preaching across the internet, was like have multiple price points, not just charge more, but like let people self-select, because actually the very first buyer of the App Design Handbook was a designer at 37 Signals. And they bought the complete package. And it was one of those things where we realized like, oh, they've got the company credit card. To them, $29 and $149 are the same number, right, until it gets over $300, $500, something like that. Like the income expense report is like still just forward the receipt, and actually Patrick McKenzie, who goes by Patio 11 all over the internet, he said something that was interesting as I was thinking about charging for content, right? He was saying that no HR manager wants to write a payroll check that has researching free stuff on the internet in the memo line, right? Because we're always like, why would you buy that book? Why would, like, it's free on YouTube or it's free over here. And it's like, to someone doing it as a profession, like their time, nothing is free, and so if you can give the most condensed version up front, and in this case, like they could buy the book that would tell them how to do it, or they could buy the complete package that would have like all the, templates and everything else so they could do it X amount faster. Then they're like, great. Because the company cares more about pace of the project than they care about the cost to get
cost.
there.
Yeah, that's interesting. It kind of, you have to marry the right type of audience where you manage to reach these decision makers within companies, not just your hobbyist at home who might think 150 is 5 meals versus $30 one meal, or they're used to buying books and not everything else. But then you get like a leader at a company or someone where it's just like you said, an expense to them. Yeah, it's nothing, and then like it's better to buy something bigger that takes less time to learn from. So, but take us forward. So it sounds like you became a full-blown information marketer at that point, like you said. So blog, email list. How far did you go with that? Was it a huge sales funnel worth of various products and so on, or?
I was never deep in that world, like, because there's two sides of it, right? The direct response marketers who are like the pros at funnels and everything else, and there's the bloggers who are like at the extreme would be like, I made this thing, I hope you like it, And the magic of the internet is you can make a crazy amount of money doing both. It's just one is very sophisticated and the other is like, very casual. So I was somewhere in the middle. I ended up writing 2 more books. One about designing web applications that had twice as big of a launch to a 3,000 subscriber email list. And then later I wrote a book about self-publishing and about my techniques and all of that, which I feel like every information marketer goes from like their thing to then talking about how they did their thing, So I also went on that journey. But maybe taking a step back, there's a blog by someone who's now a friend, Jason Cohen, who founded WP Engine. And he has a blog called A Smart Bear. And there were, in like early 2011, there were 2 designers who published design ebooks on the same day, Sasha Grief and Jared Drysdale. And they had very different pricing strategies, but they showed up in the same community. Sasha was charging like $3 or $6 for his like little book on UI design, and Jared had like a full ebook that he was charging either $29 or $39, something like that. And they like both showed up on Hacker News at the same day. And so Jason Cohen saw this and was like, this is fascinating. Like, both of you have wildly different strategies. Both of you come on my blog and explain why your strategy is better than the other person's. And so they did. And there's just these great, like, simple, transparent posts. Like, they're not trying to sell anything. They're just explaining it. And I read that. Oh, the other thing is, like, Sasha made like $7,000 in 48 hours. And Jared made like 8,000 or 9,000.
Okay.
And so like, just remarkably close numbers. And with small audiences, right? I remember hearing like the guys at Basecamp, they're like, yeah, we self-published our book. It made $400,000. And like, there's nothing relatable about that. But for me getting going, it was super relatable to be like, oh, a designer just like me with no audience could do this thing and it could make, $7,000 or $10,000. And so what was funny is that I did all my stuff, and then I went on Jason's blog, some number of months later, and was like, they're both wrong. Here's the best pricing strategy, which is really the combination. Charge a lot of money like Jared was doing, and use multiple packages so that people could self-site and select. It was like, look, I did, way more sales than they did with an even smaller list because of smart pricing. And that's where I got into, like, people were asking me more about packaging and pricing and self-publishing and all of that, even when they were asking about design, because I'd just been transparent all the way along. So you asked how big that business got.
Like, I mean, the whole thing.
I got it to about
the teaching of the design part and the teaching of selling products part.
Yeah. I got it to about $250,000 a year. And then it basically stayed at that level until actually in 2013 is when I started ConvertKit. I was using MailChimp, got frustrated by it, became fascinated by like email marketing best practices. thought about switching to Infusionsoft because that's what everyone was using at the time. But I was like teaching user experience, and it felt criminal to be like a user experience, expert and using a clunky tool like Infusionsoft. And so I just decided, okay, I'm going to build my own. And that's when ConvertKit started.
Okay.
And it was a long road to get going, but that was 8.5 years ago.
Yeah. Okay. No, I can see the connecting threads there. So you're an information marketer. You understand this world of small business creative people who can do a lot with small audiences. You're also in the design space. That was your original teaching space. And it's true, Infusionsoft, I remember when I was considering them, it had this nickname of Confusionsoft because of how confusing it was to get started with it. You need to hire someone just to learn how to use it. So you're a design guy. You're not going to like enter that world. It feels like you're going against the rules. There's a little bit of a jump though to then say, I know, I'm just going to create my own next level email autoresponders platform, and it's going to be very design orientated, easy to use, which I do remember actually when ConvertKit first broke out. It was kind of attached to the idea, easy to use, intuitive, simple, but it's a big difference between selling an ebook to creating a SaaS platform. Right. Plus, like you said, Infusionsoft, I mean, at this point in time, there's Aweber, ActiveCampaign, MailerLite, MailChimp. God, there's so many. I was using
iContact.
Yeah, iContact.
Campaign Monitor. The list
One
goes
Shopping
on.
Cart was my first ever one. There's just tons of email autoresponders plus next level ones where they're email autoresponders and basically CRMs with customer management, checkout, shopping carts, affiliate programs, all that sort of stuff built in. So if people think it's confusing now, it was still confusing 10 years ago to make that choice of what platform to use.
Yes, it was.
But you decided to make it more confusing and create another option, right? So take me through maybe the early, like your testing, because like how do you launch something like that because you kind of can do an MVP, but it needs to at least be able to do a lot, and that requires quite a bit of coding up front. There's potential to lose a lot of money to launch something that no one wants. So what was the early days of ConvertKit?
Yeah, well, the first thing is I wanted to get back into making software because I had this, I was going to say year-long deviation in talking about software. It was really only like 4 or 5 months. That part of my life was so condensed. Like I wrote multiple books, started ConvertKit, and all in like a 7-month, 8-month period. In a 1-year period, I wrote 3 books and started ConvertKit from like summer 2012 to summer 2013. And so it was just, I mean, I look back now, I'm like, I don't know how I was that prolific. Like,
you were married, right? So you weren't like a single guy doing this too.
Married with a kid.
Wow. Okay.
So I have a 9-year-old now. So
I do the math. Your baby would have just been born around about that time.
Yeah, I quit my job when, like a week before my baby was born.
And then you wrote 3 books and started.
In hindsight, I don't know if that's the. Yeah, I don't know if that's the best timing, but it's how life works. So let's see. Oh, as far as breaking down the problem, there were 2 problems that I was really frustrated by as like an ebook, self-published, information marketer type person. One was giving away like a sample chapter or some content, later like Clay Collins and others, would call it like a lead magnet. And that was surprisingly difficult to do. Like in MailChimp, you couldn't do it in the free version. In the paid version, you'd have to, like I would actually use their translate function because you couldn't change the text of the like confirm your subscription button to say like download your free guide, unless you like translated it to another language, which it was super hacky. And then I also wanted to be able to send an autoresponder, a series of emails timed to when you signed up. And that I felt like was really clunky. So I was really trying to solve those 2 problems. And later, lead pages came out around the same time, and like their lead boxes and all of that, and they solved the first problem. But that went from like email marketing platform to like two very specific problems that I'm trying to solve. And I actually designed an interface then for like, we later called them email sequences, but an autoresponder that like just had all the emails down the side with the timing that you could see there. And then in the center panel was the email itself. And so you could really edit it as a single flow, whereas every other tool would treat it as individual emails. You have to like fully click into the email, write it, and then fully exit. And so in Aweber, MailChimp, and Infusionsoft, it was just such a clunky process. And I remember like the UX side of me was like, this could be so easy, like tabs, And so narrowing it down to those two problems really helped. It still took forever to get like, I guess enough features to be able to compete. Like I remember even probably 2 years after I started, James Clear was a friend of mine, still is. And this was before like jamesclear.com and all of those days. He was just starting to get traction with that. And I was trying to get him to switch over to ConvertKit. And he did. He signed up and was like, wait, you don't even have a page to like list all your subscribers. You don't have like, there were so many things that were missing. And so he was like, basically like, I love you, but like, this is not there yet. And so it was a big deal when like 4 years later, I think in 2019, he moved his whole list over to ConvertKit. He was like, okay, now this is a real product, know? Wow. So like that, MailChimp had been building their product for 15 years at the time, now 21 years. And so it's hard to catch up. So it took a long time to get that feature parity.
So like, but how do you do that? Do you launch without the good features and then you have like a leaky bucket? You have a lot of churn because people are not happy? Is that what you do?
A crazy amount of churn.
Okay.
But what I did was narrow in on the specific features. This is a great way to put a form on your site that gives away, an opt-in or something like that, or that has a free email course. So like the perfect use case was put this form on your sales page for a free sample chapter. If someone puts in their email address, it immediately sends them the sample chapter in trade for opting in, and then it follows up with a timed email course. And ConvertKit was very good at that one or two problems,
right.
And like somewhere between bad and mediocre at all other forms of email marketing.
Okay. Were you the only one coding
I remember
at the time?
Yeah. So I did the design and all the front end, and then hired out the Ruby on Rails development to a couple of different contractors.
So if we call this period maybe 2 years, like that period to get up to parity, at least with expected features in an email system, how does the business grow? Like, because if you're only solving a few features, I'm guessing a part of you is like, I don't want to promote too hard because we need to fix the leak with the churn, but I need to get cash flow to pay myself and pay the developers.
Yeah.
How do you kind of balance your marketing with product development and growth of a company?
Yeah. So the early days I was trying to do content marketing because from the blogging world, I was like, this is amazing. It's a great way to sell ebooks. It must also be a great way to sell software. And it's not, at least not in the early days. And so I really struggled there. Like, I think content marketing is amazing for selling established software. But we just had such a leaky bucket and you wouldn't get feedback, right? Because someone comes to your sales page, they're like, oh, this is interesting. And they decide not to buy and they hit the back button. But they never actually tell you why they didn't buy. And so it was about 2 years in, we were at 2,000 a month in MRR, maybe less. 1,500, somewhere in there. After working on this for 2 years, and I had this conversation with a friend named Heaton Shaw. We were at a conference together, and he was just like, look, you've been working on this for 2 years. You've been really successful with ebooks. You'll be successful with something else. This isn't working. Like, you should shut it down and move on. And like when he said that, I was really taken aback and surprised. But then he like let that sink in for a little bit, and he said, or like you can take this really seriously, stop treating it like a side project, because I was doing both, the info marketing content business and ConvertKit. He's like, or you can take it really seriously and like go all in, give it the time, money, and attention it deserves, and build it into something remarkable. And that's ultimately what I ended up doing. So actually, I didn't shut down the info product side, but I just stopped working on it. And my idea was like, oh, we'll like have passive income forever, and it'll be amazing. And it like, I was doing like 10,000 a month on average without launches and that kind of thing, and that so quickly went to 2,000 a month. Like, it dropped off very quickly. But that's when I like hired someone, like put our savings into ConvertKit. So like put 50 grand in, and hired a full-time in-house engineer, like gave him equity, and then I started doing direct sales and basically started trying to do everything possible to win every account. And that's when we started to see growth. So we were at 2,000 a month in January 2015, which was just after that pivot. By July, we got to 15,000 in MRR. September was like 22,000, and then October was 45,000. November was 65,000, 70,000, and we closed out the year at 98,000 in MRR. And I was just annoyed that we couldn't get to an even 100,000.
Fair enough.
And then the next year we went from 100,000 MRR to 500,000.
Incredible. Okay.
As like the flight, like it felt like a rocket ship.
Definitely want to know how that works. But just to go back, you said direct sales. So this sounds like it got you from 2 to 100,000 MRR. 98,000, sorry, not 100.
Yeah, exactly.
Direct sales in my mind means you're on any platform you can think of and you see someone mentioned, I need an email autoresponder, which one do you think I should use? And Nathan Barry rocks up and says, hey, have you heard about ConvertKit? Is that kind of what we're talking about? Or
so I did some of that. But I always thought that like stalking Twitter mentions or something was like kind of weird and creepy. Actually the Aweber team does it to us all the time, and we're just like, what are you guys doing? Like, go make your product instead of like trolling our, mentions of ConvertKit on Twitter. But what I did is it started with positioning. So first we were like email marketing for people who have problems like this. And it was just really lame positioning that didn't resonate. And so a friend named Tim Grahl, who has been in the book publishing world for a long time, just a remarkable human, he kind of called me out on that. And he's like, look, you're not getting traction. If you were to narrow down, like pick an audience, any audience, and say like, you're the best email marketing tool for this narrow slice, then like you'll get traction. People will understand how to help you, where you're like, who to refer to and all of that. And he wasn't intending that we go after authors, but I was thinking of like the Chris Gillibos and Tim Ferrisses of the world and stuff like that. And I was like, that's who we're building for. That's who I want to be. Like, great. ConvertKit is now email marketing for authors. And on one hand, that got us immediate traction, which is really cool. Because now people would be like, oh, I have a whole community of authors. Do you want to come teach a workshop to them? I have a friend who's an author, like we got immediate traction. It turned out that a lot of it though was people who were like, it wasn't the author I was thinking of. It was my life dream is to have a fiction, like publish my novel on the Kindle store. Oh, but this is hard. Never mind, maybe I'll give up. Right. So we got immediate demand and then crazy high churn.
Wow.
And so my takeaway from that was that a niche is good. I just chose the wrong niche, or I'm positioning it wrong. So like 3 months later, we changed it to email marketing for professional bloggers and started going after the people who were in a specific space. And I looked at who we already had as customers. We had a paleo recipe blog. We had a men's fashion blog, a travel blog, some of these others where like who had traction. I was thinking, okay, if I look at that one person and draw a bigger circle around them, who would I get? And so direct sales for me, it looked like going after like paleo recipe blogs run by women.
So specific.
And like there's probably a defined list. Like instead of trying to list all the recipe, like all the blogs or all the recipe blogs, Like now we're down to paleo recipe blogs, and then the run by women or run by men distinction on there is that people tend to flock together with people like them. And so you can end up creating like, big fish in a small pond or an echo chamber type thing. Like I got this email where someone, maybe taking a step back. So what I would do is get a very specific list of people and then reach out to them all directly. I would follow them on Twitter. I would comment on their blogs. I would like interact in their circles and then send them cold outreach emails. Then, try to get them to sign up. I'd be able to use the one anchor client that I had like as a reference, basically like ConvertKit used by people like, and I'm like name dropping someone who I know you already know because it's a small circle. And so the direct outreach email would be like, hey, I saw that you're using MailChimp, and I'm just curious, is there anything that frustrates you with MailChimp? I asked because I'm working on building a tool called ConvertKit in the space. I'd love to hear your feedback kind of thing. And they would always have a list of things that frustrated them. And it would magically be the same things that frustrated me because I had just come from using MailChimp and like, it's all the same problems. And so we go through that. One thing that happened in that process, I remember talking to a fitness blogger, and she was like, it feels like everyone on the internet is switching to ConvertKit right now. And I remember going, okay, well, we're at $6,000 a month in recurring revenue. So I can definitively tell you, and these are inside thoughts. These are not outside thoughts. I can definitively tell you that everyone on the internet is not switching to ConvertKit. And what I actually said was like, oh, that's interesting. Like, tell me more. And she basically talked about her mastermind group in that space and said like, well, so-and-so uses ConvertKit. And I'm like, I know they've been using ConvertKit for like 6 months. They're the reason I'm going after this little space. This person is thinking about it. This person is about to switch. And this person brought it up just the other day on our mastermind. And like you created this echo chamber and this feeling in a tiny group of people and got really good traction.
Very smart. Because the echo chambers online are really small. Like you feel like the internet's big, but you're actually spending your time in a couple of places where there's really only a few hundred to a few thousand people talking to each other about the same subject. So if you're in there and 4 or 5 people keep talking about ConvertKit, it does feel like, oh, everyone's switching to ConvertKit suddenly.
Right. Yeah, and at a time when the numbers just aren't there. So that was kind of let's say up to 15,000 in MRR was a lot of that. And I noticed then that every sale I made the next sale a bit easier. And so like Paul Graham has a line about do things that don't scale. And I remember when I started direct sales, I was thinking like, I can't do this because it doesn't scale. I need to do like content marketing or paid advertising or something else, right? But the thing is that like getting customers, it just helps you get customers. And so whatever you can do to get those early ones, it doesn't even matter what else you do. It's just like stack those wins. About the 15,000 mark, we got 3 customers on the same day. Actually, so we went from 10,000 MRR to 15,000 MRR in a single day in July. And it was all from 3 new customers. One was a barbecue blog, like how to use your Traeger kind of thing. And they didn't end up being meaningful in the story. The second was a blog called Wellness Mama, which was very like, I remember looking for them and like they had the autocomplete in Google. Like you type wellness and it like autocompletes to Wellness Mama. I'm like, oh, you must be big. So they were big in the health and wellness space. And then the third one was Pat Flynn. He signed up and it had been this long conversation with him, actually through his best friend, Chris Ducker, who had started using ConvertKit like a month or 2 earlier. So they signed up in the same day. And then what ended up happening is they started talking about it like a month or 2 months later. People were like, what tools are you using? And so in the health and wellness space, we had Katie and Seth with Wellness Mama talking about, oh, we're using ConvertKit in their mastermind groups. And then in the business space, Pat was over here talking about how he used ConvertKit. And so then like the flywheel started working and the buzz started really coming in. And a few months later, we launched an affiliate program and started doing webinars, and so it was basically, and kept doing the sales, right? But it was basically the sales got all that initial momentum, maybe call it up to 25,000 in MRR. And then that turned into just this pace of how fast everything was going. And it kind of blew up from there.
So to go from 25 to 500,000, you said by the end of this sort of, not the second year of your business, but the second year of this rapid growth.
Of traction.
Yeah, traction basically, before you decided quit or stay. You called it a pivot earlier, but it's more like you just recommitted to, this is my main business. Obviously, when you say flywheel, in my mind, I understand you're saying, so we bring in more customers, which means they're more likely to talk about us, which brings in more customers. You're more likely to hit these, let's call them micro influencers within an industry, like a Pat Flynn or the wellness blogger or barbecue blogger, whatever it might be, which then, because they have mastermind groups, they're recommending you, and it sort of spreads virally within these small pockets of industries. I can imagine you could do that forever, really, because you could just go from niche to niche, doing like you were doing, kind of direct. Obviously, you'd have to expand your team. You couldn't be the only person doing that. And then if you add the affiliate component, like you said, and I know this is probably where I started hearing about ConvertKit, because suddenly, oh yeah, Pat's doing one of these JVs with Nathan, and then someone else was doing one, and you're suddenly, every day there's a ConvertKit show happening somewhere to an email newsletter, right? And that happened within my echo chamber, and I can imagine that could be within other bubbles and different topics around the internet. Is that enough to get you all the way to 500,000 a year in run rate?
That combined with doing webinars.
Okay.
Because what happens, like the affiliate program is driving a lot, but like most affiliates, don't drive anything.
Right.
There's like
80-20
I think
rule.
Chris Gilbo referred to it as the 98-2 rule, where it's like only 2% of your affiliates will ever make a single sale. Not even the 80-20 distribution, but like 98% are useless. And then because someone can promote at any time, they'll promote never, or like, oh, I added it to my resources page, but like, what else am I going to do? And then a customer could sign up at any time, right? You could hear about ConvertKit in your echo chamber, and you're like, great, yeah, that's on my list for never, And so a webinar really made an event and basically said, sign up today. Right. And that was really, like, those things together really drove the growth. And so that actually took us to, 500,000 a month in revenue, which would be $6 million a year.
That's huge. I mean, we're actually already at an hour, Nathan, so I really want to we're not even at 28 million a year run rate. So first, I just have to note the power of positioning. It really is amazing. You did enter a crowded space. You decided to create a great UI, a great user interface. And then you said, let's position this first for authors, then for bloggers. And then you kind of did like a sniper attack within different niches for blogging. Right. So, and then webinars and affiliate marketing take you to 500,000. I'm assuming your internal team is growing while all this is happening, customer support staff, engineers, product, front end, back end. You're becoming less the jack of all trades founder guy to the I'm the CEO and I hire people and do strategic big thinking decisions. Maybe take us forward with that kind of preface from the 6 million a year business to where it is today and the 28 million. Do you just keep doing everything, hiring better team members, and you're at 28 million?
I mean, there's a lot that went into it. Somewhere in there, we started to figure out paid marketing as well.
Okay. When you say you hire someone to figure it out, right? Is that?
Yeah, exactly. We grew the team. Content marketing turned into a big thing. Like I tried it early on because that was what I came from, right in the blogging world. And then it didn't work, so we moved away from it. And then, probably around that 300 to 500,000 in MRR range, we started to invest in a blog. We did something different. We named our blog. It's called Tradecraft, and we released like dedicated issues on a particular topic. So instead of like blogging continually, we said, okay, we're going to put out one issue a month on like selling digital products, on how to launch a podcast and something like that. And those got just really good traction, a lot of good backlinks. The advantage is you could make it a big launch. It was a launch of a free thing, but it was a big launch all the same, and it was impactful. It came with like this beautifully designed PDF as well, so you could read on the web, or anything like that. So it generated a lot of backlinks and a lot of attention, and that grew content marketing into a big channel for us. So actually, our single biggest driver of traffic today is our powered by links. And right behind that would be organic search. Now, a lot of organic search is branded, and it's kind of a pain to split those out, right? So you got to do that. But our highest, organic search converts at double the rate that powered by does. So as far as new, free accounts, free trials signing up, search is the biggest by far. And a lot of it is from, 4 or 5 years of investment in that. There's one other thing I'm not sure, I'm hesitating slightly because I don't know if I want to give away this tactic, but
Sure.
It's probably common enough that people do it now. One thing that we did is we started writing a lot of stories about the creators using ConvertKit. And so we would hire photographers to go to that creator's house, do a whole photo shoot with them, which costs, between $200 and $500 for us per story. And then one awesome thing is I feel like so many people, as they work from home, they just don't have good photos for their website, and they're never going to book the photographer and all of that. So we do it for them, and so they'd leave. Not only would we write the story and promote them, but we'd also be like, but here's all the photos, and you have the rights to them, and use them wherever you want, use them on your site. So it's fun to go through these creators' websites and be like, oh, that's from our photo shoot, on their about page and whatever else. But we also started asking, hey, would you be up for it if we release these photos for free as part of our stock photo library on Unsplash? And pretty much everyone was like, yeah, totally. That's great. And so we just had these beautiful photos on Unsplash. And what happened is they started getting downloaded crazy numbers of times, 20 million times kind of thing. And they're quite popular. And then they get used around the web. And so what our team does, one of our contractors on our SEO team, does a reverse image search for our more popular images, and then just says hey, this is a photo from our library. Thanks so much for using it. You can totally use it without any credit, but if if you're up for it, would you mind adding a credit link to ConvertKit? And they make it totally clear that you don't have to. But the result is hundreds and hundreds of backlinks to ConvertKit and a very effective link building strategy.
That is quite the link building hack. I would have never connected the dots between all those things.
Yeah, and it's this long. It starts with photo shoots of creators and goes all the way through to a crazy number of backlinks.
Your creators then are essentially models all over the internet now, right? Because all their photos are being used. That's hilarious.
Yeah, and we always say this is what it would mean. One of my favorite examples is it's a friend, Cortland Allen, who runs the site Indie Hackers. And if you go through, I see him on other people's websites so often from the ConvertKit photo shoot, because he just, he's a Black creator. He had this in his photos, this amazing podcasting studio. It's got the great mood in the photos. Just the photos are fantastic. I would use them. Right. And we have used them in our marketing and everything. But you go on Teachable's website, and it's oh, there's our photo of Cortland, or all of these things. And it's just so funny. And he and I were joking about that on the Indie Hackers podcast of how
made him famous.
He's yeah, now I'm all over the internet. He ended up on a billboard somewhere for some random product.
Okay. Okay, one of the aspects I know, I was talking regarding you being now a CEO of you're not a venture-backed startup. One of the things you deliberately did, but is not, take on investors. You've been bootstrapped or cash flow grown the entire time. I have two questions. I want to do this in order. So just to bring it back to you growing as your company grew, how hard has it been to be the founder, but then your company is so much bigger now, more money, more customers, more team members. your role must have completely changed. How has that evolution been for you?
Yeah. There was a moment, our very first team retreat, we were 21 people. We were in this period of crazy growth. It was also really stressful because, our app was going down. We had a denial of service attack against us. We were fighting spammers. We were, just like all kinds of stuff. But we finally gathered in the mountains of Idaho for the first time. And I remember sitting there, like we're in this big living room of like kind of this lodge house place. And I remember looking around and realizing, like, okay, who's going to kick this off? Like, we're all here. Oh, you're all
Waiting for you.
You're looking to me. Oh, I'm the guy. Oh, okay. Here we go. And it being this thing of like, okay, I gotta like lead this group, and it was super uncomfortable at first. Like, I'm very introverted by nature. That's part of the reason I love work from home. Also the reason I love blogging, because I go to conferences and people like want to talk to me instead of me having to like put out effort to talk to them,
Yeah.
It's the ultimate hack. And so that was a big adjustment. And it's still something where even with a team now of over 65 people, I still would rather be more in the background. But I think that also helps because then you're not the voice that's dominating every conversation. You get these leaders who are like, I'm the most important thing, like, listen to me. And probably stifles a lot of growth and conversation that would happen otherwise. So that was a big transition. There were other things of like just skills on reading a room, reading emotions in conversations, understanding like it's not just about being right. It's about like the connection or things like that. And so one of our executives, her name's Ashley, and she's been with the company for 5.5 years now. So she was here through like that crazy period of growth. She was really good at later like pulling me aside and being like, okay, do you remember in that conversation when you said this? Did you notice that person's face? No. What was there to notice? And then she's like, okay. So next time, like just giving some of that feedback of like, it ultimately comes down to like, here's how you connect with people. Here's how you lead people. Things that I just hadn't learned. Mm-hmm. I would say like, skills around listening and decision making. Because there's a difference between, I used to think that if I truly listen to you, or the way to demonstrate that I truly listen to you is that now I agree with you, which can't always be true. Because what if I don't agree with you? And so then, do you then not feel heard? And so building skills around being able to truly listen and then being able to like make the case for your argument better than you just did. And then in that, being able to communicate my own decision. And it can be totally fine that's different from that. But I've demonstrated that I didn't go like, yeah, thanks, and like go on with my thing. So those have all been like leadership skills that have come over time. And there's a lot to it. It's quite the journey. And I don't know. It's hard, but it's coming along slowly.
I imagine you've spent way more time hiring people recently than you've been front-end designing ConvertKits, interface or things like that. Is that fair?
Well, like another example of that is we have like 5 full-time designers on the team between the marketing and product side of things. And I had a whole conversation with one of our designers, and it was so tempting to want to dive in to like the details of the design. And it's a big change that we're making. We're changing some of the navigation in ConvertKit. And so there's like a lot that goes into it. And we had to take a step back and instead like design a process. And basically what I had to think is like, okay, if I'm not here in the next conversation, what's the process that I want him to follow? And so we like went down, what are we optimizing for? What problems are we solving? Like, and really work through that and solve the process. And it was all about like, forget the problem. It was the problem turned into just an example of how to implement the process. And then in that case, like it gave me confidence that when it's him and another designer and I'm not anywhere around, they'll follow the process rather than going with their opinions. and I like almost dove in and went to my opinions, which would have completely shortchanged like what I'm trying to do long term in the company.
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, it's
and then kind of the last thing on that is I then realized, okay, that was great. That was a one-on-one interaction. I now have a designer who most of the time is going to think that way, which is great. But then what I did is I wrote out that entire conversation interaction that we had. I wrote it into a post and shared it with the entire team so that they could all see an example of thinking about like process versus opinion, so that I could like take that learning and try to pass it on to 65 people instead of just one-on-one. So it's trying to find as many of those moments as possible.
Yeah. So from you changing to a one-on-one interaction, so that can carry forward with them without you, to then the whole thing carrying forward to the whole team without you and keeping everyone on track. It's, it's a task. I'd love to know in terms of both the future growth and your past growth, your decisions around, like I was reading an article last night, for example, you were initially all about reinvesting profits and doing profit share with your team. And then you more recently switched to now you're actually wanting to share some of the equity within your company so that when there is an exit or when there is some kind of windfall from even a float on the stock market or something like that, not just you get rich, your team members will get rich, the ones who especially have been there the longest, which is different than just sharing profits. So there's that, and then there's you have never taken on investment. So like the acquisition you recently did, when I was reading about that, you pointed out the fact that you had to purchase that new company using the cash flow or the profit sitting in the bank from operating the company, not from what you've taken on from investors or any kind of loan facility. So tell me about your whole philosophy around capitalization, equity ownership, even venture capital, because one of the things I know you and I were talking about behind the scenes, that you've actually gone to the point now where you're bringing in more investors who are on a secondary, possibly to then help some of the staff who did get equity if they want to exit some of their shareholdings now. So there's potentially new owners, small owners obviously, who would come in, which then influences your future decisions. And then why wouldn't you go and get venture capital? Because you could probably raise at maybe $500 million valuation right now and just drop $30 to $50 million into your bank account to then rapidly continue to grow. So what is your thinking around all this around capital and money?
Yeah, great questions. So first, I'm not like I don't know what the word is to put on with it, but like I'm not against venture capital in the sense that a lot of people are. Like you'll see these articles of like from the Bootstrapped software community of like venture capital is evil, it's everything that's wrong with the world, and like I don't think that. I just think it's a matter of choosing what's right for your business and being really clear on what outcomes that you want. My thing took me a few years to get to this point, so I don't want to like project the idea that I had crystal clarity on this from day one of finding ConvertKit, because I actually tried when we were at that 100,000 a month mark. I tried to go raise venture capital. Like I went down to San Francisco, met with 6 or 7 different investors, and ultimately decided both I was bad at pitching and didn't get any term sheets, and also I was talked out of raising by a friend who's basically like, no, you have the growth, like stick to your own path, which I'm very thankful for now. That friend being Mike McDermott, the CEO of FreshBooks. And so big shout out to Mike. So let's see. The biggest thing, or I guess two sides of it, know where you want to go and know who you want to answer to. So I see all these people optimizing for the destination being selling the company, retiring, starting the next thing, whatever, any of that. And they're willing to put up with a lot to get to that destination. That I kind of don't think that they ought to put up with, like a pretty sucky life of working super hard, putting up with coworkers that they don't want, any of those things. And it's all about like, I got to get to this, like this sucks now, but we'll sell the company in 2 years or we'll IPO and then like I'll go live on a beach. And I just feel like life is too short to do that. that like grind it out and put up with things for any purpose is not worth it. And so I think about optimizing for the journey. And I think that you'll live a better life. It'll be more true to your values and all of that if you optimize for the journey. And so in that, it's like, how can I have the biggest impact now? How can I do the work that I want to do now? And the other side is, who do I answer to? And so if you're raising capital, you answer to those investors. Whereas if your investors are your customers, if they're the ones providing all your cash flow, then you answer to your customers and to your team and to yourself rather than to this outside group. So you're able to think much more long-term. You're not at risk of like, if you miss 2 quarters of earnings in a row, like the board is going to remove you as CEO and appoint someone else.
Which happens a lot.
Which happens a lot. And to be fair, it's not always a bad thing. Like often there's a lot of people who should start companies and are not meant to scale companies. And who knows, I might be one of those people, but I don't have a board that can remove me. So, that all of that's really interesting to think about. And I wanted to build something where we served creators. We started this conversation talking about musicians and artists. I don't have to justify to a board or something that the best financial opportunity is to go after music versus say like enterprise email marketing clients. I can say I think the most enjoyable journey that will also have financial upside is to go after music, and that's what I'm optimizing for. So that's one side of it. The next thing you're talking about was the team side of profit sharing versus equity. I went into it thinking, if I'm optimizing for the journey, then I don't have an exit in mind. So equity does not have value. And this is something that Jason Fried and David Hennemeyer Hansen from Basecamp preached a lot. I now think it's nonsense. I don't know if we swear on this podcast. But I think that it's nonsense. And so, like, you should always be everything you do should be trying to build equity in something, right? That's how wealth is created, is through equity rather than just income. And so what I realized is that if we build a valuable company, someone will always want to own part of it. Either the company will want to buy back those shares from someone who wants to sell, or there will be another investor or another friend or someone else who comes in and wants to buy some of those shares. And so basically, like, we can provide liquidity for those team members one way or another without having to change our journey and without having to compromise that side of things. And there's companies like Atlassian, that built this massive, almost entirely bootstrapped company. And in that process, they ultimately did an IPO, but a few years before an IPO, they raised $200 million in entirely secondary equity, so that a bunch of the team could cash out some shares. So let's see. I guess another important point, like ConvertKit's company mission is we exist to help creators earn a living. And part of my life mission is to help as many friends, families, coworkers, humans I'm connected with in any way become financially independent. Growing up poor, that when I realized that making money is a skill that you can get good at and as a set of principles, then it's like, great, let's make this available to everyone. And so once I realized that ConvertKit was going to get to the point where it would be more money than I ever knew what to do with, then it was like, okay, it's time to give equity to the team and make sure they can participate in that upside. So there's a lot in there, but I've basically changed my perspective over time and plan to keep changing it.
No doubt.
Continue to issue more and more equity to the team. You alluded to secondary offering. It's hard to figure out how to talk about. One, because I'm not I don't have the exact language on public solicitation, which is you get into SEC rules and stuff like that. So this is not at all me saying people should buy shares in ConvertKit. But something that we realized we could do is help facilitate if there were outside, investors, friends, people in the industry who wanted to buy shares from current and former team members who wanted to sell, that we could help facilitate that transaction. And that doesn't put us on a path where we have to sell. That doesn't change anything about the company, because we're like, look, it's a couple percent of the company that's changing hands. It's going from one third party to another third party. There's no voting rights, no liquidation preferences that come with that. And at the same time, it gives people an opportunity to own a share of a company that I really believe in long term. And so that's been a cool thing. It started with Dharmesh Shah, who's the CTO of HubSpot, who's been a longtime friend, who he just emailed and was like, hey, I was listening to you on a podcast talk about this problem. Like, what if I just bought $1 million worth of shares from former team members? And I was like, okay. And then it sort of snowballed into this bigger thing. So that's kind of where we're at. The hard thing is there will be this narrative that like ConvertKit has like raised funding or something like that. And that's just not at all accurate. So that's where I was like, it's hard to know how much to talk about it without like casting the wrong narrative.
Don't want to stoke the flames there too.
Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly.
So last 4 minutes, I know you got to run off, Nathan, ties in perfectly. So what is the next step for yourself and ConvertKit, given, so you're not thinking venture capital exit, got to grow to $1 billion valuation. Mm-hmm. You're not in a hurry. You're focused on the journey, like you said. So making an acquisition to buy a music company is fun as well as a good growth decision. Maybe not as good a growth decision as, like you said, enterprise clients or something like that. But where does this go next? And are you, I'm assuming you still do want to grow. It's just you're not running to $1 billion X valuation IPO as soon as possible, but maybe an IPO one day, or what are you planning for your future?
Yeah. I'm certainly not opposed to an IPO so long as we get to maintain our direction. I think there will be a lot of companies that I think markets will continue to shift so that IPOs become even more accessible. Like if you think back to like when Pixar IPO'd in the early 90s, like IPOs happened at so much smaller of a scale than today. It's like, if you don't have 100 million ARR and 110% net revenue retention and like, all of these things, you can't IPO. And I think that will change, like the long-term stock exchange, things that AngelList and Carta are doing. Like you'll get a lot more options there, and it'll become more normal, which will be great. Like sometime in the future, you'll be able to buy shares in companies like ConvertKit or Teachable or some of the other things in an app like Robinhood, which would be, I think, fantastic. So there's that side of it. The biggest thing is to just build for the long term and like serve creators above all else. So I think about, like, we launched a product last year called ConvertKit Commerce, which is really expanding our footprint quite a bit to allow you to sell digital products, sell those ebooks and email courses and songs and behind the scenes footage and whatever else directly to your audience. And that's going to be a huge new revenue stream for us, because now we actually get a cut of all the payment revenue because we are our own payment processor. And so that's going to be really exciting, and you see companies like Shopify with Shop Pay, and Teachable has the same thing, and other companies, right? They're adding this in, and customers don't feel like they're paying anymore because they were just paying a credit card fee before, and now they're paying a credit card fee, and it's actually substantial revenue for the business. The gross merchandise volume, GMV, is really meaningful. So let's see, you're asking what's next. It's basically like keep building the company for the next decade and see where it takes us. I am both an active competitor with MailChimp and a huge fan, because I think you look at MailChimp and so many companies sell early on, right? And you look at MailChimp and they're like, what if we did this for like 20 years straight? And so I think of it as like, okay, I'm 8 years into a 20-year journey. We're at 28 million a year in revenue. I think we're still more revenue than MailChimp was when they were 8 years into their journey. And so it's like, I think there's a huge potential for upside. Compounding is wildly powerful. And so like, let's just give it, plenty of time to compound. And so that's what I'm thinking about.
Okay, awesome. Well, Nathan, I know we're actually right on the money for the time we had. Websites, so obviously ConvertKit.com and NathanBarry.com would be the two. You're happy to share anything else you'd want to share?
Yeah, I'd say follow me on Twitter, and then for NathanBarry.com, I guess check out two things. I have a podcast called The Art of Newsletters, which is where I interview a bunch of people from like Sam Parr, who runs The Hustle, to Morning Brew, to basically all my favorite people who run newsletters. And then I have my own newsletter where I talk about behind the scenes of the company. What else? I like talking about money. That's one of my no one ever talks about money. And so I feel like a private newsletter is a great place to do that. So anyway, that's at NathanBarry.com. And then if you follow me on Twitter, that's where I'm most active on social networks.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate the time and just keep up the good work.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks for having me.